Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good.
And we've got a view of your layout there. Is that the one you want spotlighted?
Well, we'll move around. I'm lucky enough to have my son Isaac helping me like he did last time, so he'll pan around and hopefully make things more interesting at the certain.
Oh, but sorry, I mean the video that you've got up where we can see your engine facility. Is that the one that you want spotlighted for everybody?
Yes, please. Mark that.
Okay. All right.
All right.
All
off we
set.
go.
Take it away.
So welcome back, everybody. Last time we were here looking at the Columbia and Western, we talked about some of the job aids we use in operations. We talked specifically about the blocking diagrams and the yard gravel departure sheet. We also looked at how we can use Rule 91 to keep the train spaced out on the main line. So I had a question on the YouTube channel that I have for the layout on how the job aids for hosting work that were described briefly in the MRP article at the beginning of the year. So I thought today we could spend a bit of time looking at those aids and answer any questions you guys might have about them. First, this is Nelson Yard. Nelson Yard is serves the same purpose on the model as it does on the prototype. It's a division point yard that separates the Nelson subdivision to the east from the Boundary subdivision to the west. It was the main servicing location for all of the power and rolling stock that existed on the southern main lines of British Columbia, which included the Kettle Valley lines. I always planned on having the diesel shop be a prominent feature in the yard as it is on the prototype. So on the prototype, the shop itself was built in the early 50s. It was one of the first dedicated diesel shops created in North America. Not the first, but one of the first. Up until that point, there tended to be more recycled steam facilities. It consisted of two large run-through tracks where light maintenance and running work were done on locomotives, as well as two heavy bays. And it was situated inside the Y, right in the middle of the yard, which is also the place it's located on the model.
Hey, Mark. Sorry to interrupt you. Can you either speak a little bit loud? The audio is coming through a little garbled. Can you speak a little bit? Try speaking maybe a little bit louder or get a little bit closer to the camera.
Okay, as long as it's not too close. Yeah. Just the zoom level?
No, we can't.
I'll try and speak a little bit louder. Is that better, Eric?
That sounds better to me.
All right, well, let's see how we go.
Okay.
I have a little bit of a raspy voice, so we'll try to do what we can. So the prototype, I'll start where I left off. The prototype is situated in the middle of turning Y on the layout, just as it is on the prototype. And I wanted the ability to simulate the hosting rolls, although I was concerned I wouldn't have enough space and heat capacity for a whole body doing nothing but hosting locomotives. But I wanted to make sure that the design could at least accommodate it if you had the opportunity to do that. So about 3 years ago, I started planning for the model, and I started looking and researching exactly how the prototype was used and how the hosting steps existed. The model of the Columbia and Western has been in operations now for about 10 or 12 years. And initially, I saw that the operators were simply using the diesel shop mock-up we had as a diesel house, effectively. So they were sticking the locomotives away at the end of the run, and they were pulling them out without really, following through with any kind of process associated with servicing the locomotives. It was really just used as a storage facility, and that wasn't very satisfying. So we came up with a process where the locomotives were brought in from the road and left on the west end of the tracks, and then moved east through the shop. And we used that for many, many years. And it wasn't until the model was finished that I decided that we wanted to try and replicate the prototype a little bit more closely. So some of the design constraints we had around how the hosting was going to work was I wanted it to be a part-time role, not a full-time role. I wanted to replicate more closely exactly how the shop worked. And I was fortunate enough to know Mike Baroni of Trail BC, who some of you may know as well, who actually worked in the shop in the early 70s. So he was able to tell me exactly what happened. And I found out that actually the process was far more ad hoc and random than I gave it credit for. The logical engineer in me wanted everything to be nice and consistent, but that's not how the real prototype worked. And I also wanted it to be fairly lightweight in terms of not having to keep a track of a lot of numbers. So the job aids that we use, which we're going to talk about, were worked towards after a process of trying things like magnet boards and even phone applications and timers. We tried a variety of different things for about a year, and we settled on the process that we currently use. There are two primary job aids. The first one is here. It's located on a clipboard, precariously located right across the delicate model I worked on for 2 years. So it's held in place with both clips and Velcro, just so that the inevitable doesn't occur, the thing fall on top of the model. And I'll point out some of the features. Hopefully you can see it okay. So on the left-hand side, for the hostler, we have the steps that the hostler is going to go through to service the locomotives and the amount of time that they take. So all inbound power is dropped on the southwest side of the diesel shop, which was the same as in the prototype, and it's where it's closest for the engineers to walk towards their checkout board, their sign-out board, when they sign off their job. At that point on the shop track, the hostler picks up the power and will move them to the fuel and watering racks, which are in the east side garden tracks, for approximately 30 fast minutes. After those 30 fast minutes, they move to the sanding tower where they're sanded for 30 minutes, and then moved inside the diesel shop proper, where routine maintenance and stocking supplies are done for about an hour. After that, it depends upon what direction the next job for that consist is going to be going in. If they're going eastbound, the power is moved to the eastbound garden tracks. If it's for a westbound power for a westbound train, they move to the west end garden tracks. It's on those garden tracks that load testing is done and the sanders are tested. And of course, the load testing generates a tremendous amount of oil smoke that has to be done outside. So that's the process that we follow and the time it takes for each of the steps. Below that, we have a diagram for the hostler indicating where on the model that those points actually are. And on the right-hand side, we have a table which I make up for each operating session at the same time I do the arrival departure sheet, which indicates for the inbound power what's going to happen to it. I don't deal with power that's already present at the beginning of the session. I assume that's ready to go and ready to be used during the session. So the inbound power is in the order at which that power is expected in, and it's by the lead unit number, which is the Digitrax number, the DCC number. So we see the first power in is 1406, and it's going to be used at noon of the operating session on an eastbound train. This is important because it tells the hostler when that power has to be ready and complete to be used. And also the fact it's eastbound means that the direction that it has to be pointed at is on the eastbound, going for the on the eastbound ready tracks. So it means that power is going to need to be turned. If it's coming in westbound, it's going to be going on eastbound, so it needs to be turned on the Y. So that occurs for each of the locomotive sets that are coming in. In this case, it's about 9 different locomotive sets. What has to happen to them? So that's the first job aid. Now, we need to figure out a way to relay the power to the step that it's going through and how long it takes in order to finish the servicing step that it's in. So we looked at using tables. We tried tables for 1 or 2 sessions where the hostler would actually write down the time in and time out of each individual step, and that was a tremendous amount of work. I looked at using a magnet board, looked at using the timers on the like egg timers and stuff. Didn't have the room for all those things. So we ended up using the second job aid, which I simply call timer tags, which exist in a little box. And the hostler can simply pull them out with tweezers. And they have 4 numbers on them, either 00, which is the top of the hour, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 45 minutes. And that's the must wait until time before that job is completed. So for example, if I have power that's going to the sanding station, that's a 30-minute job. If my fast clock, for example, is 6:48, I know that is not going to be completed until 7:18. So I would pull out a 30 number to indicate that by 7:30 that work is done. And I can put that tag beside that locomotive or on top of that locomotive or just somewhere convenient. So I know I can't move that locomotive set until that 30 minutes is done. So I can use that for a variety. I don't worry too much about the accuracy of that because don't want to worry about confusing precision with accuracy in this case. I mean, just using a simple number for a whole consist, for example. So let's see exactly how that would work. So here we have the west end of the diesel shop. I have a DT400 throttle that's dedicated for the hostler role. This is useful because you can run more than one locomotive at a time using it, which is very handy when you're moving locomotive sets around. And also it can do the consisting. Regular road crews use the utility throttles on the Columbia and Western. So it's a little more complicated. So here we have a consist which came in eastbound, extra 4236, 3 units, and it's been left by the road crew at the designated spot on the shop track. So the hostler will pick it up and we'll move it to the east end garden tracks. Which is where the watering and fuel will be added. I'll run a little bit more quickly than we would in the during operating session. And the switchman Isaac is going to throw a switch when we get past that point.
That means we have to know what it's for.
Okay, take the points there. Thank you, Isaac. So then the power is brought in to the fueling and watering location, which is its first step according to the job aid. To bring it into the fuel and water racks. Now, I don't bother moving the power so that each locomotive is indexed during its servicing. That's something we could add. Now, fuel and water is a 30-minute process. My fast clock says it's just past 7 a.m. So I know that by 7:30, that work's going to be done. So I can take a tag and I can place it on the power. And I know that set is ready at 7:30. Now, the power beside it, 8549, that's been sanded, that's been watered as well. Its next step is to be sanded. It was finished at 7:15. So I know that work is now done. I can remove that tag. And I can move that power to the sanding station. Which I will do. Guys, can you throw that switch for me, the one that's under the sanding tower? Here? Yeah, that one. Thank you. So that power takes 30 minutes for it to be sanded. Time is now 7:09. So I'll say that by 7:45, that power will be finished sanding. So take that 45-minute tag out. And I'll just leave it inside the sanding station. So I know that that's ready at 7:45. Now finishing off the power that we have, we'll move to the westbound end of the yard. We have 8727 here. That has no tag beside it. So we're assuming that it's finished servicing and ready to go, which in fact it is. It's ready to go for the Philcan special. Inside the shop here, we can see there's a tag on the top. Inside, I can read the number is 8717. That's now been finished because it was finished at 7:15, which is now. I can bring that power out onto the westbound ready tracks. This is for the craft switcher, which will be going out shortly. But it still needs to have its load testing and sanding testing done. So I'll bring it out onto the westbound garden tracks. Takes 30 minutes to do that final load testing. 7:15, so it'll be ready by 7:45. We'll take another 45-minute tag out. Put it on top of the power. Ready to go. That's basically how the system works. We can add refinements, of course. If we want to become more realistic, we could vary the amount of time that the locomotives, the consist spend at the station, depending on how many locomotives are in the consist. Obviously, 4 locomotives takes 4 times as long as it services 1 locomotive. We could index, as I said, the consist to the station so that each locomotive spends time at the fueling station or the watering station. We could add incident cards, so we could randomly decide that 1 locomotive in a consist it's failed and needs to go to heavy maintenance, and therefore has to be deconsisted and pulled out. And we can do what we originally anticipated, was actually have the consistently built in your operating session. Now, I haven't done any of those things because I'm quite happy with the amount of work that this costing steps that we've introduced adds to the job. It's a half-time job, so it augments the eScan switching role. We can add it or remove it depending upon the workload and the experience level of the crew. So these are ways in which we could augment and improve it should we choose, but right now we're quite happy with the way it exists. So those are the job aids that we use for hossing, both the inbound hossing instruction sheet and the timer tags. And I just thought we'd spend some time today explaining that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
That's great, Mark. Thank you very much. A couple of things. Can you, the job sheet that you had up above your layout on the fascia, can you get a zoom in on that, or send me a PDF I can post?
Definitely can send a PDF. We'll try and do a Zoom. Isaac, can we do Zooms or not?
I lost your video there. Mark? Okay, well, Mark, can you still hear us? Your second camera kind of dropped off the face of the earth. And I see Mark Johnson's question about seeing a timing tag. I believe it was just a number on there, but when Mark comes back, we'll see if we can get that. As I put in the notes, in the 20. You back, Mark?
I don't know. I've asked my cameraman.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
He's doing a great job, so I'm not going to complain.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So yeah, we can definitely forward a PDF, but we can also zoom in now if you have any questions immediately.
Yeah. Somebody else was asking about the yeah, it's real choppy. Your bandwidth has gone red here. Yeah, for the people watching, I will put this, if Mark sends me a PDF of this, I'll put this up on the OPSIG page. There we go. Yeah, I can't even read it, unfortunately. But on the time, there's a question about the timing tags. What is actually on those? We can't see them here. Are they just numbers?
That's correct.
Hold one up really close, Ben.
So they have one of 4 sets of numbers.
Maybe wait, even closer than that. Literally right up to the camera.
How's that? Can you see that?
Oh, we lost your.
No, there we go.
Okay, there we go.
That better?
Yep,
so
I can see that one says 15 on it.
Yeah, so that's 15 minutes after the hour. So
Okay.
they're either 0 for top of the hour, 15 minutes, or 30 minutes, or 45 minutes.
Okay.
Which is just an estimate of when it's going to be ready.
Got it.
The idea being that you don't move the locomotive set until that time has occurred.
Okay.
You can move it anytime in the afterwards, of course. There's no rush in it.
Got
it. You can't move it before.
Okay. Do you ever have Chuck's question here? Do you ever have locos within a consist given a bad order ticket? I think you just said you did, that you have locos in a consist that were given a bad order ticket requiring you to move just that locomotive with a switcher to a shop track for repairs.
We don't do that because we don't have the people necessary to dedicate to a full-time hospital role, but we could. That was one of the things that we anticipated in an event card. So, you know, something specific about the locomotive requires servicing. Or more likely, actually, in that case, would be that the power would need to be changed because there's more cars in the train than on the outbound train than was in the incoming train. So you actually have to build a more powerful consist. So those are all things that I anticipated if you had a full-time role you could do. And when I designed the layout, I hoped that we could accommodate that. But I don't want to introduce the additional body. We have more than adequate space on the east and west end of the yard for the yard operators to do their jobs. But the hosting location actually is the narrowest point in the whole layout, of course. Always works out that way. So there's no room for different hostler.
And another follow-up question on the timing tags. Do you ever wrap it around an hour if the hostler is distracted it sounds like that time is the soonest it can be moved, not when it has to be moved, right?
Exactly. So,
Okay.
I thought about it because we investigated using timers and egg timers and all sorts of stuff. And it felt like a little bit of artificial precision. Just because the time has come and gone, if there's no pressing need for the locomotive set, there's no need to move it. So as long as it's passed at least once, it's passed multiple times, that's fine.
Got it.
In practice, we find that what I do as the home road crews, I often find myself hustling locomotives just to make it easier on the yard crew, moving things around so that things move smoothly and things don't get plugged up. Because as you can see, we don't have the luxury of as many tracks or as much space as the prototype did for the yard.
Got it.
and the shop tracks.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
This is Doug Gurin from Virginia. All right. What kind of discretion do you give to the hostler to make road foreman type decisions? That is, choosing among units to suit the requirements for tractive effort or horsepower per ton or any other criteria where you have multiple engines sort of ready, but somebody has to make the choice.
Right now I give zero discretion, because as the home road crew, basically I establish beforehand what units are going to be used, knowing which units work well together, which units work well with the layout, which units work well with the trains. But my hope was at some point that we could, if we had a full-time role, that person could actually do the power foreman job as well, and size the consist for the size of the train. So we have the capability of doing that. Technically, we have actually enough tracks to do it. I just don't have the additional room for the bodies to do it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions. So, Mark, thanks again for presenting. For everybody who was following along, if you had the 2020 Model Railroad Planning, Mark had the cover article for that issue. There's also a link in the chat to his YouTube channel, which we'll repeat up on the past issues page on the OPSIG site. So with that, Cal Sexsmith is next to present. He's presented for us before. So take it away, Cal.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. There. Can you see that?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Now, do you see it should say Parkland Division?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So let's we'll just run through this quite quickly because I've got lots of slides. So I call my railroad the Parkland Division, which is a made-up name. Meadow Lake Subdivision is an actual subdivision on the Canadian Pacific. So where in North America is Meadow Lake? So it's right there at that little red balloon. Where in Western Canada? So it's right on the northern edge of the prairies. And then where in Saskatchewan? So you can see Meadow Lake again at the red balloon. You can see there's a patch of farmland in there surrounded by the forest. And you look down the lower right-hand corner is a place called Big River, which is where the CN got to. The Meadow Lake is where the CP got to. Here's a bit of a prototype of the CN to CP lines in northwestern Saskatchewan. So see Meadow Lake up at the upper left-hand corner. Most northerly rail point in Saskatchewan, most northerly rail point, as far as I can determine, on the Canadian Pacific.
Hey, Cal, just real quick for people who don't know the abbreviations, and this may sound stupid, CN is Canadian National, CP is Canadian Pacific. So,
Correct.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so this is, and the map here is color-coded. So the green is Canadian National, the red is Canadian Pacific, and then there's some blue lines which were joint trackage. And as you can see, the only way that the CPR could get up to Meadow Lake was to use one of two joint trackage sections, either the Prince Albert Debden stretch or the North Battleford Medstead stretch. Just a little bit on the layout. So I've got a 24 by 24 foot room. It looks an awful lot like a 2-car attached garage. It has never had a car in it. I built it specifically for the layout. This is just, you see the upper and lower decks. I don't know, and if the bottom part on the lower level, which is the most bottom part of the drawing there, is the town of Meadow Lake, and that's what we'll be talking about today. That's basically what is complete on the layout. This is a schematic of what the layout will look like. Again, just on the far right-hand side, that town there, that's Meadow Lake. That's what's been built, plus a staging yard off of it. The uppermost line is the upper deck. I've built some of that as well. I'm not operating it right now because I found it had less operating interest. Okay, this is what the town of Meadow Lake looked like as far as the railway went at the peak of its development. The left-hand side, that is the end of the steel. The plans were to extend that to Lac La Biche, Alberta, on the Northern Alberta Railways. Never done. Although there's a lot of documentation that refer to this line as the Lac La Biche branch. On the right-hand side, that is the line which went down to connect with the rest of the Canadian Pacific system. You can see the Y almost right in the middle of the town. Immediately in the center of the Y, there is the passenger station and a freight house. To the left of the station, there was a small yard, which really basically consisted of a passing siding and a business track, along which there were several grain elevators, bulk fuel depots, etc. There was room to put another couple of tracks in between the siding and the business track if business had ever developed at that point. That was never done. The tracks on the right-hand side going north of the main line, I went in to serve a sawmill. There have been several sawmills, a pulp mill, an OSB mill, etc. in the Meadow Lake area over the years. They seem to move around location to location. The plan from the mid-50s showed it as being there.
Hey, Cal, sorry to interrupt. Did you stop sharing your screen?
No.
Okay.
It says I am screen sharing. Did we go blank?
Do a stop share and reshare. I'm not seeing it personally.
Okay.
I see it all.
Okay. So maybe it's just me.
Okay. Well,
sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. The people see it now?
Yeah, I can see it again.
Yeah.
I don't know what, mine glitched for some reason. So sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh, it happens. Anyway, this is the prototype. Despite the fact that there still is a sawmill, a pulp mill, and an OSB mill operating in the Meadow Lake area, the tracks were torn out about 10 years ago, and they truck everything 100 miles. Okay, now, there we go. I just need to make sure I didn't jump ahead. Sorry about this. Okay, yes, there we are. Okay, this photo is from the Saskatchewan Archives. This was taken in the mid-1950s, and it shows the 8 grain elevators that existed in Meadow Lake at the time. You can see the tracks are quite weed grown. The main line is off to the left just before that brush. You can see there actually is a bend in the middle of the yard. Just before the Saskatchewan Pool elevator there, you'll see a tank car. There actually was an unloading, a tank car unloading stand there, and the oil from the tank cars was actually pumped quite some distance through a pipeline across the street to a bulk station. So bulk stations don't have to be right next to the tracks. Okay, this is from the street side. Again, you can see most of the 8 elevators. You can see the British American, or BA as we call it, bulk station right on the right-hand side. The I'm guessing this picture was taken in the early 60s because I think that's the 1960 Oldsmobile coming at us. Also at the BA service station, it has the old bow tie logo as opposed to their later Monad style. And that logo actually went out in the mid-50s. So I'm assuming that just was the small town. They didn't get around to changing the sign. But again, you can see all that whole row of grain elevators. And here, I like this one. This is a aerial from 1961. I found this in the Bill Smiley archives, and gives you a good overall view of the town. You can see very right-hand side is the freight house, then the passenger station. You can see 3 of the bulk stations there for Imperial Oil, Shell Oil, and BA, and then the whole string of grain elevators going along. And then there was actually a stockyards beyond the last grain elevator. You can also sort of get a feel for what the town looked like at that time. And in fact, in the distance, you can see the drive-in theater north of town. They probably didn't want it in town, so. And here's, I'm sorry, this picture, I don't know why it's so blurry, but it was originally, it's off a 35mm slide, which has been scanned several times. That is a Montreal Locomotive Works RS-23. And that was the power that was used for most of the time on Meadow Lake after they dieselized in about 59. And the 8013 was originally bought for the Meadow Lake and Medstead subdivisions. That was its original assignment. So that's why I have that one. So how do I take this prototype, which I figured would be about 50 or 60 feet long, is almost a mile long, and put it into a 24-foot long stretch in a basement, as well, not wanting to have a lot of stuff sticking out into the aisleways. So from the station down to the end of track, I did that pretty close to what was there, the station, the main line, the siding, the business track. I realized that I could flip the Y into the lower right-hand corner, have it pointing the other way, and then tuck the sawmill right in tight to the Y. And basically, if you look at it, it's like I took the Y and the sawmill and flipped it 180 degrees and stuck it in. I was able to include a spur for the freight house and the other spur across from the station. Originally, I thought I would just have a spur there and say, well, that's for the sawmill, which is off in the aisle. There was a pulpwood loading platform about halfway down the sawmill spur, so I designated that both as a team track and a pulpwood loading spur. So this trackage for this is all in place and operating. And then just a rough schematic, and this is showing the various car spots. Again, I know it's not readable, but it's just give you an idea. There's a lot of stuff there. So the industries. So, and there's 2 pages of this. There was a lot going on there. So, and how I reduced it down. So the prototype, there actually were 8 grain elevators representing 4 grain companies. I reduced that to 4 elevators. There was a 6-car stockyards. I made that into a 3-car stockyards. There were 4 bulk fuel depots. I'm looking at having at least 3. I could probably squeeze in the 4th if I wanted to. And sometimes I think, well, maybe I should only do 2. There was a salvage yard, which was stuck between 2 of the elevators. I'm sort of iffy on that. Sawmill was obviously a big source of traffic. The pulpwood platform was for many years. Before the pulp mill was built in Meadow Lake, there was a pulp mill in Prince Albert. And the Prince Albert pulp mill also owned the Meadow Lake sawmill. So a lot of wood chips and pulpwood that from that operation came down. A team track. Canadian Propane had a propane dealer. There was some company called FM Clark had a warehouse. I don't know what FM Clark did, so until I find out, I'm choosing not to model it, although I do have a place for it if I find out it was doing something interesting. So then you look at the loads in and out. So elevators, of course, it's mostly grains going out, but they do have some things. Some of them would bring in animal feed. A lot of them would bring in fertilizer. Of course, you get grain doors. Some also had coal sheds at one time, and they would trade the farmer coal for grain. Stockyards, I'm mainly looking at livestock out. I think any feed they wanted there would be sourced locally. The bulk fuel plants, various types of fuels coming in there, and other petroleum products, which I would assume, things like motor oil and stuff like that, I believe would come in boxcars. If I do the scrap yard, that would be scrap metal. That, though, I think I can handle off the team track if I really want to get into it. The sawmill, so basically lumber and wood chips out. The pulpwood platform, pulpwood out. The freight shed, so less than carload, plus some retail goods and foodstuffs coming in. You notice on the outbound, I put fresh fish. Something I've discovered is a lot of these lines on the northern prairies, they would, in northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, there is a fairly active freshwater fishery. And that fish is shipped all over North America. And at one time, it was shipped in express refrigerator cars. So I might do that. Team track, again, mostly in, I figure to be machinery, fertilizer, and building supplies. There would be out of an area like this in the northern grain belt, a lot of hay would be shipped out, especially they tend to have better hay crops in the northern part of the province and the southern part, so a lot of hay was shipped south. Something else in my research, I discovered that there was a lot of honey shipped out. There's a lot of beekeepers, and there's evidence of of it being shipped out by rail at one time. And again, the propane dealer would be propane coming in. So the trains, and this was again branch line country, less than daily service. So in the mid 60s when I'm modeling, so the prototype, and one crew would do this with the 8013 originally as a locomotive plus a combine. So train 653 would run from Prince Albert to Meadow Lake on Monday. They'd overnight. They'd become 656 on Tuesday and run down to North Battleford. Overnight there, 657 would come back on Wednesday to Meadow Lake, and 660 would head back to Prince Albert on Thursday. And then on Friday and Saturday, they just do the Prince Albert Meadow Lake turn. And that would go on 6 days a week, nothing on Sunday. Eventually, these became freight trains, and eventually the train to North Battleford was cut out, and the Meadow Lake train actually went tri-weekly and sometimes even more frequently as the sawmill got busier and after the pulp mill opened. So for a model, I basically operate mixed trains in one direction and way freights in opposite directions. So I run a total of 4 trains in a session, which basically takes you from Monday through to Thursday in one day. But that's the way you got to do it on some of these branch lines. So I'm still fiddling around with how I'm going to do car forwarding. Right now, I'm just creating yard lists and other switch lists using a spreadsheet and a little bit of jiggery pokery and just come up with these. So for the first session I did, this was the yard list for Meadow Lake. So basically just a list of what cars were in what tracks and what was to happen to the cars. So if you look, the first one says on the mill track, there's CP 81110, and it's a hold, so its destination is mill track. On the chip track, there's CN 873635. It says lift, and it's headed for Prince Albert. So, and then you'll also see if you get down onto the business track, you'll see there's a few cars which are spots, so they're in the wrong location and need to be respotted. The first thing I realized after running the first session is I had too many cars. So in subsequent ones, I've reduced that a little bit, and I don't have near as many off spots. And then I make up a list for each train. So the trains are, again, fairly short, and they've gotten a little bit shorter. So similar type thing. It basically, for each train, I just listed in alphanumeric order the cars in the train, where they were heading, and the cars coming into Meadow Lake. I gave the specific location where they were to go, and like I said, that's working fine for now. As the layout expands, it might become a bit cumbersome. I'll probably have to automate it or go back to car cards. So this is the temporary staging yard. RS-23s are hard to come by in HO scale. There was a brass model many years ago. I have one. It needs a lot of work to make it run smoothly and be DCC compatible, so it's still sitting in its box. So a couple of the Rapido SW1200 RSs are serving for now, and I believe that they would have substituted at times for the RS-23s. So I did a 3-track staging yard. So 1 track for Prince Albert, 1 for North Battleford, and then the third is basically where the caboose is sitting is a storage track. So here's the start of the session. So here's the sawmill, 2 tracks. So the nearer track where the boxcar is sitting is what I call a mill track. That's for lumber loading. The far track where the wood chip car is for chip loading. This is the house track. I've got a Wolfers freight house substituting right now for the CP freight house. I also have a platform track for unloading machinery, and the intent is to also be a pit track there for unloading covered hoppers. Okay, and then say the track across from the station, I designate that as a sort of a team track and the pulpwood spur. So see a boxcar there doing something on the team track portion, and a gondola loaded with pulpwood, and the flat car getting ready to be loaded. Here's the 2 bulk plants at the east end of the business track, just sort of represented with some tanks I had kicking around for now. The stock car is obviously an off spot. And here's the elevators. Again, there's room for a couple of Walther's elevators at the far end, and a couple of my plywood stand-ins closer in. There's not quite enough room for full depth on the elevators here, so there's going to be a fair bit of kit bashing and scratch building here to get the final idea. The white Walther's shed, that's actually going to be replaced with a coal shed, because recent research has shown that Beaver Lumber Company had a coal shed sitting about there. The gap between the 2 elevators, there might be a fertilizer shed going there, or maybe the salvage yard. Haven't decided yet. And then this is stockyards. You can't quite see it, but there's a stockyard just beyond the last elevator. I have a better photo coming up. Okay, so the first train arrives. And yes, you'll notice we also have a stand-in station. That's looks like that came out of the Revell factory. And I think it came out of there about 1960, because it's been kicking around since I was a little kid. But it's about the right size and it fits. So the combine is spotted at the station, and it's unloading express and maybe passenger, singular. I don't think, I was told by a friend of mine who actually rode this mixed train in its last few weeks of operation. Number 1, he was the only passenger. Number 2, there were only 5 seats available for revenue passengers. The crew had taken over the rest of the combine. And we turn the combine on the Y. Again, the combine is a stand-in. That's just a Concours car. And I thought it works really well with the main line and the siding there is you can get in there and you can sort the train out once it gets in down, for the trailing point, the facing points, and a few other things. And as you can see, the way that business track is jammed, there are far too many cars here. And we get them all, finally everything rearranged, and 656 is preparing to depart. You see the combine is actually parked at the station just in case the passenger wants to continue on. And you can see a little bit of change up in the cars. And that's sort of after 656 is departed. There's a few cars sitting on the siding. What happens, because most of these are the cars he's picked up which are heading for Prince Albert, but the train's heading to North Battleford, so they're being held there for the next train. And there's the west end of the yard. Now you can see the stock pen. That's actually a Cano models kit of a CPR standard 3-car stockyard. There actually were 2 of these side by side in Meadow Lake with a common wall between them, so I had a 6-car capacity. And 656 departing. And then the 97, the freight arrives. This is the ones come up from North Battleford. Supposedly this is 2 days later. And again, he does his switching and gets everything rearranged. He's tied onto those cars on the siding and he is ready to depart. And there he is departing. And then at the end, you can see there's been a change of cars here. The chip car, the load's been picked up and empty's been substituted. The box car's still there and a gondola's been added. Quite a bit of change in the house track. The tank car at the far end that's where the propane dealer is. The flat car with the 2 cats on it seems to have rolled forward. He's supposed to be at the platform, maybe a bit of a grade. The team track, supposedly the 2 insulated box cars being weighed to be loaded with honey. And view of the east end of the business track. Some of the cars have been shuffled around, and the west end. And you see we've got the tank car parked there, which will be feeding into the fuel standpipe to be shipped to the co-op bulk station, which is about 300 or 400 feet away. And finally, just the prototype picture. This Doug Phillips from Calgary was the fellow who actually rode the train, and this is him riding train 660 at Leoville, which is about halfway back to Prince Albert from Meadow Lake, and they were switching in town there. The black smoke is from an Elco, not from a steam locomotive. So, any questions?
That's great, Cal. Let's see. Seth asked, "Do the colors of gas correspond to grades?" And Rich Gosselin helpfully added, "Only when we've stopped for tacos and beans when heading up grade." So I'll let you answer the legitimate question, and we'll leave the other part out.
Yeah. So I don't know if this was true everywhere, but definitely in Canada, so bronze gas was regular, red gas was premium, purple gas was farm gas, which had no road tax applied. And later on, we got blue gas, which was unleaded.
All right. Chuck had asked about the passengers riding in the combine or the caboose, and you answered that already.
Yeah, and a good chunk of the combine, and I have an interior photo of it as well. I had about 5 or 6 seats was a caboose with the bunks and everything. So.
Got it. And then Seth is asking, what are you planning for lighting? LEDs under the upper deck, ?
Probably.
Okay. Well, that's easy. Any other questions? You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask Cal.
Cal,
yes?
How do you introduce some variety in your sessions, like the return of the grain doors, or reblocking the grain for different recipients, or anything else that would add interest further to your operation?
Well, I'm working that through, like I'm filling around with a spreadsheet right now for the car forwarding, and what I'm trying to do is come up with a frequency. So like after so many carloads of grain shipped, there would be a carload of grain doors come in, and using a random number generator, I'm just sort of seeing what pops up. What I find, I think on you know, especially right now, I mean, the layout will get bigger, hopefully. But at this stage, yeah, I'm finding that I'm trying to introduce variety simply by having all these various rare events, and you assign them a probability of 1% or something like that. And so, I mean, maybe once every 4 or 5 sessions, you'll get a car grain doors in from one of the elevators, is the idea. I started off like on the business track. I sort of said, well, half the cars out of the business track will be grain, and a quarter of them will be fuel, and you know, and an eighth of them would be cattle, and then the rest will be the various rare events. So that's sort of how I'm doing it. And I'm figuring the sawmill doesn't have quite as much trackage, but again, probably be one car of lumber for every 4 cars of grain or something like that. So I'm still adjusting and fiddling with the numbers, but it's working out not too bad at this point. Once I realized that the original plan was, as I said, well, I can bring 12 cars in and 12 cars out during a session. But then do I have cars being held? So I think I was having too many cars being held for too long, because it meant that there had to be 24 cars in town when 12 more cars arrived, and 36 cars in town at once is too many. 24 is actually not bad. So I'm looking more, instead of 12, 12, 12, 8, 8, 8. So 8 coming in, 8 being held, and 8 going out.
There's a question about what's the longest loco car combo that you use the Y for?
The Y stub track is long enough for 2 small diesel locomotives. My recollection on that line, and I'm just running a single unit right now, but my recollection was that they usually ran 2 units, and they usually were run elephant style, because CPR believed that a locomotive with a front radiator, the radiator should always be pointing forward. So I wanted to make it long enough to trim 2 of those. There's actually not enough room for the locomotive and the combine, so I have to park the combine and go around and pick it up the other side.
And then the conductor just has to go flip the seats, right?
Yeah, well, they actually, the way they had that car set up is it always had to be running the same direction. So they didn't actually flip the seats because they had, the way they had the caboose section set up at the back, and the marker lamps are kind of permanently mounted. Finding Doug Phillips was really good, because he actually rode that train in '71 and took pictures.
All right. Question from Burr about how do you feel about the length of the stub track at the end of the line beyond the staging?
It's working okay. It would have been nice to have a bit more length, and of course, that wall could be cut through, and I could gain about another 4 or 5 feet.
Walls just always get in the way. You keep seeing this thing about too many cars. I don't. There must be some Canadianism I'm not understanding. The too many cars. I'm like, what? I just don't understand what you're saying, but I do understand what you're saying. But okay,
it's not having too many cars. When we moved, I had it was commented to me. It says that box says freight cars box 22 of 28.
That's what I call a good start.
and of course, each box has several cars in it.
Yep. All right.
And I said, what do you mean?
All right. Well, I think that's the end of the questions. So Cal, Mark, both thanks for presenting today. We appreciate your time and effort in doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.